All right, welcome. We are getting started right now. Welcome to our webinar today, Solutions for Food Traceability. We have a great session coming up for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Colby Kavanaugh. I am the head of marketing here for Siegel, and I will act as your moderator today. We have a great group of panelists and a lot of great content, so we'll get started right away. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We are starting our webinar here at the top of the hour. Our presentation today will be in English. And the webinar is being recorded, and by attending, you will receive a link to the recording after the event, so you can review the content post-event. We are taking questions today. We are taking them via the Q&A capability in Zoom, which you'll find on the menu bar below. Feel free to submit your questions. We will try to answer them via that Q&A function in real time. And then our host, Bart, will be taking the questions and moderating a discussion at the end of our session here today as well. We will start with a few introductions here of our panelists and a welcome to you, our attendees. We will tackle some of the challenges for food safety and some of the regulations around food safety. We'll talk about power of item traceability. We will talk about the technology that's involved with that. And then a discussion around getting started, next steps, tips and tricks from our panelists to get moving down the right path here. We have a great panel for you today. Bart will act as our host. Bart DeMonk, who is a 30-year veteran of the supply chain industry, working with some of the biggest companies out there. Bart, thank you for joining us. We have Patty Blessing from Zebra Technologies, who's the RFID engagement manager, who's worked with across multiple verticals and has some deep expertise in the technology in the space. Chris Teague, who works for Siegel, is the head of our industry solutions group here and works with some of the biggest Siegel customers on creating solutions for a lot of the topics that we'll cover today. And then Beto Saavedra is on our product management team, and he'll talk a little bit about our product roadmap and what we've got planned in our product roadmap for 2025. So without further delay, Bart, I'm going to kick it over to you, and you can take us through some of the facts and figures and challenges within the industry today. Bart, take it away.
Very good. Thank you so much, Colby, and thanks for having me on today's webinar. Great to see everyone out there. So the first thing that you're going to see here is this number 1908. No, this is not the date of the first recorded food recall. This is actually the amount of food recalls we had to date in 2024. That's not all recalls around the world, that's just food recalls. And what's important is we've seen an increase in that, about 22% year-over-year increase. So in 2023, for example, we had about 1,563. And so we've seen a lot of examples recently of food recalls. We've seen beef and carrots recall for E. coli. And you probably remember over the summer, McDonald's had this huge recall, which really was around their slivered onions that they were putting in their quarter pounder. Now, this had a couple of different direct impacts. There was over 75 cases of E. coli, but also they had one person died from it. And if you look at the overall impact to the McDonald's supply chain overall as McDonald's as an organization, it actually led McDonald's stock price to drop by more than 5%. So if you look in the case of McDonald's and what their valuation is, that amounts to over $10 billion of just this one food recall event. Furthermore, their sales fell by over 1.5% in the months of July through September, which was their biggest decline in revenues in over 4 years. And it was also a couple of times more than what the analysts had forecasted. And so if you take that over those 3 months, that's well over $100 million in lost revenue. Now, if you look at these outbreaks of E. coli, really shows kind of how important managing recalls is for a supply chain. And what actually also happened, it was kind of like a ripple effect, because immediately companies like Burger King, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, just to name a few, took onions from their menu as well. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of other major food recalls as well around cucumbers. And fortunately, the supplier of the onions was the same supplier of the cucumber. So you can imagine the impact that has to that supply chain and that company's valuation as well as revenues. But we've saw other things. I mentioned carrots. We've seen eggs due to risk of salmonella. We've seen frozen waffles and pancakes. We've seen ready-to-eat chicken and sliced deli meat. So more and more is happening in that area. And so you cannot see it not in the news. We see it obviously impacting the consumer, but it obviously also has a huge impact also on the company themselves, on their brand, and hence on their revenues. And what we're seeing is, also because of how fast news travels, we see that it impacts companies much harder, and it impacts them much faster at the same time. So if you look, I already mentioned the amount of food recalls we had, 22% increase year over year. And every recall typically costs around 10 million. If we saw the one with McDonald's, obviously that total impact on McDonald's was way more. So if you look at the number of events total, I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars of impact to these organizations. We see 48 million cases of foodborne illnesses in the US every year, and that's over 100,000 hospitalizations and several thousand people dying from those foodborne illnesses in the US. And what we're seeing is an increase in recent years. And the important part of it, it's not just that there's an increase, but also most of the recalls that we're seeing today are class 1 recalls, which is the most serious classification. There's multiple classifications. And so it's not just that we're seeing more, but they are more severe and more impactful. And then the other part is that we're seeing new types of food products and ingredients, such as plant-based meats and cell-cultured foods, that they themselves have also growing concerns with what is going on with those products as well. Now, if you look at some of the statistics in general, we see here on the left side all recalled products by product type, and devices like your electronic devices have the #1 highest number of recalls. But food and cosmetics is a very close second, with the total number you see there across the different years. And so the other part is what we're seeing, if you look at it year over year, is that number that we came to, is that large number of food recalls that we have seen. And you see it going up and down. And so you can say, well, Bart, but doesn't that number of 2024 look very similar to 2022? Yes, but again, the biggest difference is that the majority of food recalls in 2024 have been in that most severe category, which is class 1. So we're seeing more things like E. coli more than salmonella or listeria. And we're also seeing that a lot of the recalls in recent years were really due to things like undisclosed allergens or potential contamination with pathogens or foreign material. And part of that is because, kind of what we're seeing here on this next slide is the supply chains are becoming more and more global, and a lot more global sourcing of ingredients is being done. And that's really increasing chances of these issues and these contaminations at the same time. So it's very important, as those supply chains become more complex, they become more global, to keep an eye on that. And then, to make it even more complex, and obviously because of what is happening, we see more and more regulations coming your way as well. And we'll talk more in detail about that. But there's obviously the Food Safety Modernization Act. We see things like preventive controls for human food, produce safety rule, foreign supplier verification program. At the same time, we see the food traceability rule, new era of smarter food safety, and obviously that impacts you, and obviously US regulation impacts manufacturers, but it's also going to impact your customers. Your customers might demand certain things from you, and they might not even be in the US. And at the same time, you might be impacted by certain regulations that are being put on your supplier of products at the same time. Now, if we look at supply chains, as Colby said, I've been in supply chains for over 30 years. When I started in the 90s, a lot of supply chains were still much more regional. We would buy products more regional. We would sell them more regional. Now we have a lot more global firms and companies having multiple tiers of suppliers around the world and then selling products around the world as well. So supply chains continue to get more intricate, more complex. There's many more moving parts. So if you look here, the complex supply chain of food, where you have raw materials coming in from multiple sources, then it's going to manufacturer plant warehouse, then it goes to third-party logistics. From there, it goes on to a warehouse or distribution center. From there, it can go to a store. Then it can go from a store to a customer or a final consumer. And so all these things, all these flows are all areas where food can get contaminated. And so it's very important, both that inventory at rest as well as that inventory in motion, to really track that and make sure we have control over what's happening with the product. Now, at the same time, obviously, we know that customers want more thanks to, things like e-commerce, faster deliveries, real-time tracking. That has an impact on technology as well. And so I think there's really an opportunity for companies to really focus on how do we get more technology, because how do we do more with less? Fortunately, companies are faced with things like labor shortages. That can be in the plant, that can be at the warehouse, but even at the office, there's still a war for talent in supply chain. We're seeing higher turnovers. The average attrition rate of warehouses in the US is about 55%. We're seeing consumers want to have faster delivery time, so things have to speed up. You have less time. And at the same time, the customer wants a better customer experience. So customer satisfaction is so important. Now, at the same time, there's still companies who have a lack of supply chain visibility, although that's something we have seen a lot of investment in over the last few years. And in some cases, poor demand forecasting. But at the same time, in some cases, you might have stock outs of products, and that can be caused because products are now being taken off the shelf because of a food recall. Or in some cases, we might have over-ordered certain products, and now that product potentially can go bad or is now being wasted. And at the same time, it's no surprise to anyone, we continue to see more and more disruptions in supply chain. It's coming from a lot of different angles. We look at it from weather perspective. We look at it from port strikes. We look at it from labor shortages, all of those different things. And then, as we mentioned, continuously new and increasing regulation and standards. And then obviously we have to look at the importance of technology and how technology can help with the replacing outdated systems or a lack of systems, and how that can play a role in that supply chain. And what we really see here is that, we need to have better and more digital intelligence. So in that flow of product, we're seeing that the collection of data becomes more and more important. And you might think, well, Bart, a label, maybe not that sexy, but labels are really at the heart of the supply chain. They really let us know everything about that product, from where they've been as a raw material all the way to when it's going to get delivered to the consumer and it's going to be digested by that consumer. But the important is, how do you get all that data harmonized, put it all together so you have that end-to-end view? And so without that labeling, you wouldn't have that information. And so labeling really is that source of digital intelligence. But then it's important to put it in a system so you have access to the data. You can track it end to end from farm to the final consumer and be able to get much faster decisions based on the data you have at hand. And that becomes very, very mission critical. Now, looking ahead, what does that mean? Obviously, I gave you some stats, and so it's no surprise that food safety will remain a top priority for both consumers, for both the retailers, food retailers, restaurant retailers, food manufacturers, obviously also regulators. And so what we're seeing is that there's more and more investment in technology. There's different types of technologies, and we'll be talking about some of that here on the webinar. there's more focus also on prevention, because it's not just when it happens, how do we get the data together, how do we report it, and then what do we do, but how do we prevent that? And again, that's where technology plays a big part into that, but also things like food safety training as well as risk assessment. And then another part of it is once you have that intelligence and you collect the data and you put it in a platform, now you can start also sharing that data, start sharing it between suppliers and customers, between you as a manufacturer and your end customers and your partners. And that's becoming more important. And even sharing that data under certain rules like FSMA 204, where you have to share that data in real time with government agencies, et cetera. And so I think it's much more important nowadays for, really for companies to stay more alert and better informed with not just their own data, but also the regulations that are out there, statistics, trends in food safety. And so that's really what we're going to be discussing for the rest of the webinar. And we'll start with some of the details around some of those regulations. And for that, I will hand you over to Chris Tague. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, Bart, thank you. Those are some impressive numbers. We're seeing that in real time, with our customers. We have Patty Blessing here as well from Zebra, and she's seen we're both seeing those same things, right? That the increases in the number of recalls and food safety issues, and I think that's really what's driving some of this, and consumers too, right? They're demanding more visibility. They're demanding more transparency in their food, but better safety too, right? So I think around the world, various agencies are coming up with plans. There's variations in the EU, but in the US, the FDA has really added to that Food Safety Modernization Act with what they call Section 204, which is enhanced reporting capability from that. And it really, even though they don't prescribe any technology, it really is a technology solution that we're seeing out there. So so just what is that FSMA 204 regulation, right? And so, in a nutshell, and the basics of it are, there is a food traceability list out there that, is the high risk foods that need to be tracked today. There is those reporting requirements, for anyone who really touches those products on the food traceability list. There is what we call KDE and CTEs, which are the key data elements. So, where was it harvested? What's its lot code or batch code? And then the CTEs, which are really the critical tracking events. Where was it shipped from to? What was it transformed into? What's the new lot code that was generated? And part of that requirement, you need to be able to share that data out again within 24 hours back to the FDA. And and there is a requirement that we need to share that data with our trading partners as well. So that really, even though it doesn't mention technology, of course, technology is what enables that FSMA 204 requirement. So, we look at the food traceability list, and you'll see all the all the common high risk foods that we see out there. Of course, cheese and fresh cut leafy greens and the tropical tree fruits and cut fruit. But one thing to understand about this list, it's in, even when we started looking at this, it's in constant evolution, right? And so some of the conversations we're having today with our customers are, well, we don't want to just track this, right? It doesn't make sense to focus on just this list and have separate processes. This list will change. We expect, proteins or other items to be added to it as well. But our customers are really saying, well, let's do full traceability. Why are we only focusing on this? That's more work, right? And so when we look at customers like or retailers like Walmart or Chipotle, they're requiring everything to be traceable. And I think most people are doing the same.
Chris, when you look at that list, though, it's very interesting because when you look at the most recent recalls, you see those items on this list, and so there was a lot of thought that went into that list by the FDA, and it is those items that are the most susceptible to issues. So they have also talked that within the rule there is a the option for them to update that every 5 years. And they have stated that they'll do that. And when you think about this rule was passed in 2022. So
Yep.
we're not very far from seeing some changes and updates to that.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, we've seen it since 2022 as the rule was finalized. And that goes as well for those critical tracking events and key data elements, right? I mean, they've been changing about who needs to track them, whether it's the first receiver or the harvester, or which kind of retail establishments are responsible for collecting those. So, any of those critical tracking events like the harvesting or cooling, the initial packing, or the first land-based receiver of the seafood, any shipping and receiving event throughout the supply chain needs to be tracked. And then those key data elements that accompany those critical tracking events, so the product identification, and the lock code, the traceability lock code, as they call it, as well as where is the reference of that lock code, where was it harvested as well. So when we look at, how do you start to think about how to comply, right? I think there's a couple of steps that we take and we recommend to our customers is really look at your products and the supply chain. What is critical? What are the items on the food traceability list? And really understand where you're going to need to make some changes. Review your critical tracking events. Some people, distribution does not do transformation or production events, for example. And so different supply chain parties are going to have, different requirements in terms of critical tracking events and the key data elements as well. And then look at your current data capture. And I know this is something that Patty really thinks about as well, being from the hardware side, is that how do you really utilize today? Are you scanning? Are you just ingesting data? So, you start to look at how you're looking at data today, and what technology is out there to help you do that too. All right. So, I think this is really the important slide for us, right? We understand that, compliance is a pain, right? And there isn't always an ROI on compliance. But, the conversations we're having with our customers today are different to the ones we were having 2 years ago when the rule was first published, right? When this FSMA rule was first published. Everyone came to us and said, how do I do this for the cheapest price possible? Right. And that conversation has changed. The conversation is now, oh, I see the additional value of traceability throughout my whole supply chain, right? Or within my small part of the supply chain, I see how visibility, how item level traceability can help, unlock additional value and drive profits, right? It's not just compliance, right? So, even from the operational level, to improve the business, there's enhanced recall management, so you can focus on the items that are recalled instead of doing a supply chain wide removal of a single product. There's also operational benefits in terms of just having visibility of that inventory, right? And so being able to see, do I have the right product at the right time in the right place to make sure that my restaurants function correctly or my distribution functions correctly. But also reducing waste, right? And I think everyone in the food industry knows that waste is a huge problem, right? And once you have that visibility into your products and potential food safety issues as well, then you can start to manage waste better as well and not have so much waste there. As well as, enabling your suppliers to really share that data as well. So, making sure that the data is flowing across the supply chain. Today, it's very siloed, and we'll touch on that in a little bit in terms of the solution. But there's some collaboration opportunities here as well, and just lower operational costs, right? And Bart touched on this with labor issues that are out there today. Labor is expensive, right? And so if you can automate some of that, then you're improving your profitability as well. So that also aligns with some strategic opportunities through brand protection. Obviously, having that transparency gives you a competitive advantage over your competitors. And data, right? And Bart talked about the importance of data today and making decisions based on having that that real-time data availability to you and being able to leverage that data. And then, of course, the sustainability goals, especially around ESG, just really about brand promotion and creating value for your customers as well. So.
Yeah, Chris, I couldn't agree more regarding data-driven decision making. We know that everyone is looking at how's AI going to impact me? How am I going to use AI? Am I going to use it for predictability, for forecasting, for all of those things require a base of knowledge. And
Right.
so capturing this information really enhances our long-term strategic plans for the organizations we're working with as well.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Patty. And so, when we talk about the solutions, we've worked hard over the years to really bring these solutions to market. So, I wanted to give a quick introduction, right, to what is end-to-end traceability, right? It's really a unified view of the supply chain. So, really being able to see from all the way from the grower to the from the farm to fork, as they say, and even beyond, right? So what does the consumer see? Can they scan a QR code and see where their ingredients have come from? And that flows into some of what we're seeing in terms of changing consumer behavior, right? I mean, people are demanding, and consumers are demanding that view. So that end-to-end traceability also, it really provides a digital thread connecting all of those points, right? And so looking back, you can see where my food's come from, where it's been, and in what condition it's been in, potentially too, utilizing some kind of sensor technology, for example. But I think and we keep touching on data, and I think all three of us really talking about the power of the data. But today the data in traceability systems or in supply chain systems is very siloed, right? And then so when we look at how we implement our solutions, the Seagull and Zebra solutions, what we're really trying to do is unsilo that data and make sure that that data can talk across the supply chain, and really unsilo that data and have full visibility, providing value to our customers and to our businesses as well. So, Patty, I think you wanted to touch on some technology here.
Right, absolutely. So, Chris, I think you mentioned it, and Bart perhaps did as well, that when the Rule 204 was enacted, it did not prescribe a specific technology. Certainly, a user could keep track of data using paper and pencil. Probably, when you look at the amount of data that we just discussed, that's not as practical. But we do see three emerging strategies that we wanted to share with the audience today. The first is the use of electronic records. And I think that we've had that process in place throughout the history of supply chain. Electronic records that are captured at one point and then shared along the supply chain provide visibility. It provides data. In this case, there's no physical data capture, and events are tracked using shared data along the way. So, for example, a distributor may create an ASN that they provide then to the retailer or the restaurant, and the restaurant or retailer receives that electronic record and assumes that that is their record for validation. There's no additional processes. So this is one way that we see people addressing Rule 204. The second way is taking it a step further, where we're actually seeing one of the stakeholders, maybe it's the retailer, we use that same example again, where they're actually physically capturing the data through barcode scans at the point of receipt. Receipt was one of those CTEs you talked about. So this is allowing them to actually capture a digital record at the point of receipt and confirm the exact products that are received. And they may be receiving against that electronic record. There is a risk associated with that, and that is that it does require some additional labor, and operational efficiencies are always a concern. We know with barcodes that you can scan one item that you have 10 up and scan it, that same item 10 times, and not really capture the individual lot information for all 10 cases, which may be representative of multiple lots. And then finally, we do see quite a few organizations in the food supply chain looking at and turning to RFID. And RFID certainly is that step beyond barcode where you're physically capturing the receipt or shipment of the product. You're creating a digital record. You don't require a line of sight. So you have the ability to improve the labor participation rate. And you also have a much higher accuracy rate because of the continuity of the scan. Of course, there is a risk there, and that is the continuity of labeling throughout the supply chain. It does require that you have labels to scan electronically. Finally, we are having some discussions with customers around the use of vision systems, and vision systems do present a unique opportunity as well. But I think in the end, what we've heard from industry leaders like Frank Yanis is that you really do need to look at technology to solve for FSMA 204, because the amount of data that needs to be captured, the level of accuracy that's required to make this a success, and to protect you and your brand really does require technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this slide, Patty. I think that, it really sums up and and how we approach the solution as well. I mean, being able to meet, the suppliers or the retailers or distributors where they're at, right? Are they ready for RFID? Can they do barcode? Or, do they just want to comply with their existing electronic record system? So, being able to offer solutions across that gamut of capability I think is important. And I do also love the vision systems. As we look at especially the Zebra and Seagull capabilities, those are right in our wheelhouse as well. So very, very great slide.
We'd probably also be remiss to leave this slide without mentioning that there are some standards, right, that are really important to the food supply chain. GS1 has established standards for traceability, and I think it's really critical. When you look at technology, you have to rely on standards for interoperability. So as we talk about each stakeholder having access to that data, or being able to capture data and gain visibility, I think it's also important to say that technology has to have a foundation of standards around it.
Yeah, that is very true. It's a very good point. You can't unsilo the data if everyone's talking a different language. You need to be talking the same language with those standards.
So, at Zebra, we work very closely with stakeholders across the supply chain. And Chris mentioned this, Bart mentioned this, the burden of a regulation is that there's a cost associated with addressing that regulation, meeting that regulation. It's a cost of doing business. But we know that when we are looking at technology to solve for some of these regulatory requirements, and we're looking at some of these operational efficiencies, we know there's an ROI there. As we've worked with our customers and certainly worked with industry leaders, we've been able to try to put together, a basis for an ROI that customers can use as they're contemplating these various solutions. I think when you think about the labor pool, it's very expensive. Minimum wage is going up really across the United States. We also have a labor pool where there may be challenges with training, and there may be even language barriers where we have English as a second language. So what can we do to help that labor be more successful for the retailer or the supplier or the manufacturer? We can help them by providing technology that helps them do their job better, whether it's barcode scanning or RFID. We know that with RFID that you can consistently expect up to 75% labor savings for inventory management. We know that not only from the food supply chain, but we know that from retail in general. So we have some great historic data that's been captured and can apply that across any stakeholder in the supply chain. As you're capturing this data, you're also saving significant amount of time. Waste reduction, Chris, you talked about that. I don't know of a company out there that doesn't have some sustainability objective, right? And and waste reduction in food is really critical because there's certainly a lot of lens on how much food is wasted in the food supply chain. A lot of that is a result of food that's expired before it's consumed. And that can happen anywhere in the food supply chain if we don't have great visibility to what we refer to in the industry as FIFO, or first expire, first out. So if we're managing by expiration now, we're able to reduce our food waste by 20%. And when you think about the amount of food waste in the industry, this is a significant number, and also a significant number to report back to your shareholders and your executive team when you're thinking about, how are we going to justify these technology investments. Enhanced supplier coordination. I don't know of an organization that doesn't want a better relationship with their suppliers. How can we have a better relationship? We can have a more candid conversation if we've got real data to sit and discuss. And when we have real data about product that we've received, missed shipments, missed receipts, expiration, product that's nearing expiration, all of those things that influence our profitability, we know that we can have a significant impact in the case of missed shipments of up to 50%. That is significant, and not only in the impact to the shipper, but also reduced transportation costs and lost opportunity for the receiver that's now receiving the wrong product. We can optimize stock levels. We talked a little bit about that. Certainly, recall costs can be significantly impacted. The amount of time that it takes to react to a recall is really what is driving FSMA 204, right? Is the ability to improve the amount of time, improve the time to react to a recall so that we can reduce the number of people that are impacted by this. But recalls themselves, when not handled correctly, can have very large costs associated with them. So that's another thing to consider. And finally, bad publicity and sales loss. Bart talked about the impact of the recent recall at McDonald's, and this can be significant. I think 10% loss of sales due to a recall or public perception is probably very realistic, and something that I think every company has to consider.
Yep. Yeah, great statistics on RFID, and like you said, some of this doesn't apply to a barcode type solution, but some of it does, right? I mean, the accuracy and the reducing waste through that accuracy as well is important. RFID obviously gives some great benefits of throughput and especially around the labor savings, but also accuracy. So great points there, Patty. I think you wanted to touch on this one too.
Yeah. Well, I think we both can, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
And this is for, this has been in the news quite a bit. So most of you have probably heard that Chipotle is leaning into RFID for some of the reasons we just talked about. They are working with their suppliers to have product that comes into their stores, RFID tag. The RFID tag is, as the industry has specified, a part of a standard GS1 128 label. So they're moving into RFID to gain inventory accuracy, to enhance labor savings. And again, I think we all want to provide our employees with a more enhanced experience at work. And certainly when you can receive or do an inventory in a fraction of the time, it gives that employee more time to now go and do the things that are more important to them, interact with the customer, interact with the other employees, address corporate requirements. So Chipotle has been a leader in RFID. There are other companies out there that are starting to talk a little bit about what they're doing as well, and we're excited to take this journey.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Patty. And I think, like you said, the store associates, the operators there are really excited about having that technology, using the Mojix and Zebra tools and the Seagull software to enhance the experience and provide a better way to do receiving, right? I mean, and inventory, because they're counting it by hand. It's totally inaccurate before RFID, and this is really giving them peace of mind that they're doing the right job. But it also, I mean, and it's mentioned here, but the fallout effect, of course, is traceability, right? Is that last mile of traceability as it gets into the restaurants, and then being able to report that to the FDA for the FSMA requirements as well, and really, they're really sure about the accuracy, right? In their previous systems, they were not sure about the accuracy, and today with RFID, they're 100% confident that what they're reading is exactly what's in the restaurant. So targeted recalls and things like that become much easier. I think one other thing to add to the Chipotle solution is, it is an in-store solution, but really the bulk of the work for us was upstream in the suppliers, right? Getting them onboarded with RFID labels and providing them an easy solution to onboard and really integrate that technology into their processes. And so that was the big lift, and it continues to be an interesting lift in these type of projects. But we have a lot of process created that really streamlines getting onboarded with RFID, getting on into traceability and barcode as well. So it's a full end-to-end solution in the end, but really the visible part is in the restaurants. I think, we wanted to talk about, so I jumped ahead there, but we just wanted to talk quickly about what's next. Beto from Seagull product team, he's going to jump in and talk about what's on the horizon for the Seagull product and solutions. I was just going to kick it off, and we really touched on this, but what are the next steps, right? For those out there thinking about how do I start to comply with the traceability rule? We mentioned this. Look at your current systems and process. Choose a traceability software vendor. You're going to need technology, right? You're going to need software. You're going to need technology. That technology may be simple. It may not be handhelds and RFID or fixed readers and RFID. It may just be integrations with our system or other traceability software systems. But I think, and Patty touched on this, I think the data again is critical. Making sure that the data integrity is correct and using those standards, right? Using the GS1 standards that the industry has really coalesced around. And so, I think these are really the next steps, and then education, right? To make sure that the employees know what they're doing and why they're doing it and what the value is as well. So, Beto, appreciate you being able to join us and talking a little bit about some of the roadmap items. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. And as Patty and Chris has mentioned, there are several things that we need to provide to deliver value for traceability. And some of the platforms already have the minimal viable traceability, which is capturing the data. But we need to focus on how we are going to enable real data sharing and real data quality sharing. So that's why one of the things that we are also investing a lot is how we are going to provide better APIs for the FSMA and how we're going to track events. Because it's not only to capture the events, but it's also to deliver the right data that is coming from those. And one of the things that we have identified after our merger with BarTender is that labeling is needed everywhere, and we can provide more data accuracy, more data quality with labeling. So with that, we are also including several things on how we can bring labeling as a potential second and third data collection identification, even at harvesting, initial packing, and first receiving, so that way we can capture all of the traceability that is needed. And with that, it comes that we need to provide serialization, not only that is going to be based at ISA level, but at lot level. And that needs to be at scale because we need to provide the information that is needed to have an end-to-end traceability for the supply chain. And the last thing that we have identified that is good for valuable traceability is that sometimes the key data elements are needed to be configurable and adaptable for each of the tracking events that are needed for FSMA to do for compliance. So that is also something that we are looking at and how we can provide that better configurability. one of the things that even Bart mentioned is that we need to provide the best way to deliver value, and with good quality data that starts, but we also need to do operational efficiency. And two things that we are looking at how we can bring more is how we can automate the majority of compliance and checks, not only the ones that are related to FSMA, but other compliance checks that any brand could have additionally, and that will impact the operations that they are running. And also, as Patty was mentioning, there's the cost of the incidents for a recall, it's huge. So we need to optimize those recall management tools. And that's one of the things that we are also focusing on, because we can reduce those costs. And one of the last things that also we are tracking on operations is there are several scenarios where we need tracking of the lots, and we are providing the ability to deliver logistics at any mode, being it with plane, sea, or transport. That way you can have a full end-to-end traceability that Chris was mentioning. And last but not least is after we are able to deliver on the value, we also need to bring those items to the consumer. So one of the things that we are looking ahead is how we can bring transparency or consumer transparency as a service for the brands. And one of the things that we are monitoring at that scenario is how is the digital product passport adoption in Europe, so we can bring that potential feature to other markets. And with that, we are also thinking, now that we have labeling design at the first mile with BarTender products, how we can bring that also through the whole end-to-end life traceability. And for that, we are also looking at providing as a digital product designer, so that way the brand can also deliver a good consumer transparency that is going to be useful for the whole customers that they have. These are the roadmap items that we have. Chris, now back to you.
Thank you, Beto. And back to Bart. I think he's got some
Very good. Well, we still have some Q&A to go. So if the folks that are on have any questions, please go to the Q&A box on the bottom here of your screen and put in your questions. We do have a few coming in that we will answer. But I just want to remind you, we're just a few weeks away of the new year. That means happy holidays, but it also means the upcoming NRF. And both Zebra as well as BarTender and Mojix will be at NRF. They all have their booths, which you can see here. So if you want to find out more, want to see the different solutions in actions, please come and visit us during NRF in New York, January 11 to the 14th. So with that, let's start digging into some of the question. I think the first one maybe addressed to you, Chris. You talked about regulation. So with the new administration coming into power in the US, how is going to impact that the regulatory environment? Will the regulations go away? Will they change? What's the impact?
Yeah, I think Patty had some thoughts on that too, but in the end, I don't think it matters, right? I mean, yes, the FSMA may change, but the value in traceability, of course, is still there. But I think Patty, you have a title line into that.
Yeah, well, certainly we don't have a crystal ball, but there is certainly an increased interest in food safety. In the new administration, there has been also a statement from the FDA that folks need to be ready. That there is no plan to make any changes, no plan to extend the date. There are pilots that folks are going through right now to validate data. They want to make sure they have their traceability plan in place by January 2026, which is the deadline for that traceability plan. And the good news is that the FDA has said there won't be audits until 2027, but that folks need to be ready in 2026 in the event of a recall. So I think that, yes, this administration, the new administration has talked about reducing regulation, but we also know that they are also investing heavily in the the health and safety of the citizens in the United States.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Patty, on top of that, right? We said, supply chains are more global. So even if the US regulation doesn't apply to you, you might be impacted by other regulations, either your customer that's in a different country or your supplier being in a different country. So make sure you stay abreast of all those global regulations as well. So maybe question again to some of you is, what's the real cost of compliance? And is it really worth making the investment or taking the risk?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, from my perspective and what we're seeing out in the industry, I would rephrase that question. It's one, what's the cost of not complying, right? Of course, but also turn that cost into a profit center, right? And you can do that with the technology, with the visibility, like we said, the additional value that our customers are seeing in terms of just having accurate inventory or just having that visibility for targeted recalls as well. So yeah, I think that question is a good one, but the reality is I think the opposite is true.
I think the other thing I would add is I am sure some of the folks that are on the call today are FSQA team members, and this actually helps to make your job better. Makes it I don't know if it makes it easier, but it gives you more data and more standards to rely on. So I think from an FSQA perspective, you have to look at this as a real value add to your organization.
Very good. And I would say maybe one more, just in the interest of time. Question is, how do we see the convergence of barcode and RFID technologies coming together over the next few years with these applications like compliance and safety?
Yeah, I can just as an example, we're working with customers today that use both, right? Barcodes are widely used. RFID is being more and more used today. But there's always a need for a fallback technology in the food space. That it really, you can't stop the supply chain, right? If you don't have an RFID label on a product, you're still going to send it out, right? Because the restaurant needs to operate, the supply chain needs to operate. And so, I think all of the solutions need to be able to support both, right? Whether it's RFID or barcode or vision systems, there's always going to be product substitutions within the supply chain. And it's a fast moving supply chain. The food is fresh. And so you're not going to, in a lot of cases, so you're not going to stop that supply chain for a missing label.
But I would also say that anyone, today that is not looking at supplier compliance around barcode labels probably needs to add that to their 2025 to-do list because that's the foundation, right, for all technology. Again, we talked a little bit about the GS1 standards. So, today that there are still suppliers out there, and there are still organizations that are not using labeling. And I think getting those labels as a part of the supply chain is really critical. It makes it easier to move to newer technologies like vision and RFID. So I think that everyone needs to start to make sure that they are ready with a GS1 label on their shipping and receiving assets.
And obviously related to this question, it's great to see that obviously Seagull with BarTender and then Mojix came together and being able to provide that and providing broader data. And then obviously with a partner like Zebra, who's obviously the leading vendor out there that helps with devices and data gathering. So how that all comes together, that's the data that's really leading us to data intelligence that helps companies to make better decisions in real time and be more compliant. That being said, we're at the end of the webinar. So I want to thank, first of all the people that were on here on the webinar. Thank you so much, Patty, Pito, and Chris, as well as you, Colby. Thank you for everyone that tuned in today for the webinar. As a reminder, we will send out the recording of the webinar. And finally, we'll see you hopefully at NRF, again, January 11th to the 14th in New York. There will be 3 booths. Please come by and visit us, say hi. I'd love to see you there. And for everyone, happy holidays. Spend some great time with the family. Stay safe and have an incredibly good start to 2025.
Awesome. And thank you, Bart. Great job. Thank you, everybody, to attend.
Thanks, everyone.